My name is Alyssa Cordell. I am 46 years old, a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy, and a woman who has spent more nights at sea than at any table set for family. This morning, I received a message from my mother. 7 words. No punctuation, not even a hello. Don't wear the uniform. It's humiliating. She was talking about the 2 silver stars I'd earned across decades of command. She meant the white uniform hanging in my closet. Clean, pressed, quiet in its dignity. The same uniform I wore to deliver folded flags to grieving spouses, to salute caskets lowered in silence, to hold the line when everything else fell apart. But to her, it was a costume, an inconvenience, an unwanted shadow at my sister's wedding. I sat alone in the hotel room they didn't know I'd booked, sunlight catching the corner of my naval insignia resting on the desk. I could have left it there. I could have slipped into the beige dress they'd expect, smiled politely through their rehearsed warmth, nodded as they erased me again, one family photo at a time. Instead, I stood, and I picked up the uniform. They wanted a quiet guest seated at the back of the ballroom. Someone forgettable, someone compliant. They had no idea that the man sitting in their front row was about to stand, pivot to the rear, raise his hand in full salute, and say just one word that would unravel 25 years of lies. Admiral. And when he did, every breath in that room stopped cold. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about memory. About what happens when the daughter they tried to erase shows up anyway, with rank, with proof, and with the one thing they could never control: the truth. Let me take you back to the moment it all cracked open. The phone was still in my hand when I heard the buzz again. A second message, this time from my father, arrived with his usual efficiency, short, sharp, clinical. Please don't cause a scene. This is Eliza's day. I didn't answer. I didn't throw the phone across the room either. I just sat there in the stiff hotel chair, letting the message flicker against the screen until it faded on its own. Outside, the seagulls circled over the Atlantic like clockwork, disinterested in human theatrics. I envied them for that. The thing about humiliation is, it doesn't come all at once. It arrives in careful doses, like a slow IV drip of salt water into a wound. I should have seen it coming. The first hint wasn't the invitation addressed to the Cordell family without a name. It wasn't even the RSVP link. Sterile and impersonal like a software update. No, what warned me most was the absence of everything else. No call, no check-in. No, will you stand with your sister? Just a seat, I assumed, somewhere far from the camera angles. They didn't want me there. Not really, but they couldn't not invite me either. Not when their guest list included diplomats, CEOs, and high-ranking defense contractors. My absence would raise questions. My presence, silent and tucked away, would allow them to say, "Of course she came. Family first." I'd seen this choreography before. I was the outlier they dressed up as obligation. Still, part of me hoped. Not for warmth. Not anymore. But for a moment of decency. Maybe my mother would say she was proud. Maybe my father would look at me like I wasn't a tax write-off in uniform. But instead, I got that text. Don't wear the uniform. It's humiliating. I stared at it until the words blurred. Then I stood. I walked to the closet. The uniform was exactly as I'd left it, hanging in quiet defiance among a row of civilian coats that had never seen war. I reached for it with steady hands, brushing my fingers over the fabric. Every stitch had a memory. Arctic waters, Persian Gulf winds, a silent prayer in the engine room during a blackout. Promotions no one celebrated with me. And the stars. Those twin silver stars that sat on my shoulders like anchors. Earned, never gifted. They called it embarrassing. They called it disruptive. What they meant was, you remind us of everything we don't understand, and that makes you dangerous. I slipped the jacket off the hanger. It felt heavier than usual, like it knew it was being called to war. And it was. There was no trembling in my hands as I laid it on the bed. Just something colder, deeper. Not rage, not yet. Something closer to clarity. I didn't respond to the message. I didn't need to. Because deep down, they already knew what I was going to do. They just didn't know how far I'd go with it. Outside, the ocean kept breathing, relentless, untouched. I pressed my palm to the glass, watching the waves fold into themselves. There was a time when this coast meant childhood summers, bike rides, clam chowder on the dock. That time was long gone, replaced by something cleaner, sharper, a reckoning. I turned from the window. It was time to see this wedding for what it truly was, not a celebration, but a theater. And I was done playing the ghost in their script. Next to the mirror, I clipped the nameplate to my jacket. Cordell, all caps. Let them see it. Let them choke on it. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the forgetting became official. I hadn't meant to open social media that day. Usually, I avoided it. Too many curated lives, too many smiling faces I didn't believe in. But a notification had slipped through from a former academy classmate. I tapped it without thinking, and there it was. A photo, bright and polished, already climbing toward 1,000 likes. My sister Eliza, arms wrapped around a man I didn't recognize, ring hand forward. Her eyes glassy with performative joy. They stood on the deck of a cliffside venue, all soft lighting and champagne flutes. The kind of place that smells like wealth even through a screen. The caption read, "She said yes, future Mr. and Mrs. Halston." I didn't feel my stomach drop. I didn't feel anything at first. Just a narrowing of focus. The way a submarine officer scans the sonar screen when everything goes quiet. Photo after photo followed. Eliza beaming with our parents. Eliza surrounded by friends. Eliza lifting a glass as my mother kissed her cheek, and my father raised a toast. I searched for myself. Instinctively. Not because I thought I'd be there, but because some part of me needed confirmation. I zoomed in on the group shots. I looked through the tags, the comments. I wasn't mentioned. Not once. Not even a polite, "Wish Alyssa could be here." No placeholder, no acknowledgement. Digitally, I no longer existed. It wasn't a mistake. It was surgical. It was the kind of omission you plan, the kind that tells you your absence wasn't unfortunate. It was required. I closed the app. The glow of the screen lingered behind my eyes like an afterimage. For a second, I couldn't remember why I was breathing. Then I heard it. The tick of the old analog wall clock. Loud. Mechanical. Indifferent. Later that week, an envelope arrived. Heavy stock. Expensive. My mother always did have a flair for stationers. My name wasn't on the address. Just Cordell family. Norfolk. VA. No rank. No title. No acknowledgement. Inside was a thick ivory card embossed with roses and looping calligraphy. The wedding of Eliza Grace Cordell and Mason Halston, to be held at the Windmere Bluffs estate. 4 p.m. Saturday. There was no handwritten note. No, "We hope you can join us." Just a QR code to RSVP and a note about attire. Formal, Garden elegant. I held the invitation in both hands, the way you might hold a formal notice of deployment. Not because I wanted to attend, but because I needed to understand exactly how far they were willing to go to pretend I didn't matter. This wasn't an invitation, it was a transaction. A cold checkbox in a family ledger I'd never had access to. That night, I poured myself a single glass of whiskey. Neat. 1 ice cube. I sat in the dark, the invitation on the table in front of me, and made a decision. I wouldn't be attending as a daughter, or a sister. I'd be attending as myself. They wanted an absence that wouldn't embarrass them. A shadow. A polite nod from the back row. But I had no intention of being anyone's placeholder. Not this time. They had tried to erase me from the guest list. They forgot I kept the original draft. And I was about to sign my name across every line they left blank. The Windmere Bluffs estate sat high above the coast, perched like a monument to things that glitter but never grow roots. It was the kind of place that held its breath for perfection. Whitewashed balconies, curated gardens, and lawns trimmed to the millimeter. I arrived the day before the wedding. No one knew I was in town. I'd booked a quiet suite on the opposite side of the bay, overlooking the water rather than the celebration. I didn't want to see the preparations, the dress rehearsals for a play I'd never been cast in. But something pulled me there anyway. Maybe it was duty. Maybe it was the last echo of a daughter still searching for a reason not to walk away completely. I didn't wear my uniform. Not yet. Instead, I chose a plain navy blouse and black slacks. Neutral. Invisible. A language my family preferred me to speak. I drove to the venue just before sunset, when the staff would be distracted and the air smelled like lemon blossoms and unspoken expectations. I walked the outer edge of the ceremony lawn. Round tables were being arranged under a sweeping white tent. A catering crew adjusted silverware with tweezers. Even the centerpieces looked rehearsed. I spotted my mother near the floral arch. She stood with Eliza, both in matching ivory trench coats, flanked by a harried young planner flipping through a clipboard. They looked so calm, so polished, like nothing in the world had ever reached beneath their skin. I approached slowly. My heels tapped lightly across the stone path, not loud, but present. My mother turned first. Her smile, quick, automatic, flickered when she registered me. Then it stiffened into something more appropriate for boardrooms or burial plots. "Alyssa," she said, crisp and dry. "You're early." "Eliza." I nodded. My sister turned, eyes briefly widening before narrowing into something colder. "You found the place," she said, as if it had been hidden in a canyon somewhere. "It's hard to miss," I said quietly. The planner, sensing tension, excused herself with a forced laugh and disappeared behind the catering tent. We stood there, the three of us, framed by roses and resentment. I glanced at the chairs. I noticed there's no assigned seat for me on the program. My mother waved it off with a smile too thin to be mistaken for warmth. "Oh, that? The planner's handling the final placements. You know how these things are." Eliza didn't say anything. She folded her arms and studied a nearby bouquet like it had insulted her. "I just thought," I continued, "maybe after 25 years of serving this country, I'd warrant a chair that wasn't next to the sound booth." Eliza rolled her eyes. "Can you not make this about you? Alyssa, this is my wedding." The words didn't hurt. They used to. Now they felt like stones bouncing off armor. "I'm not making it about me," I replied. "I'm making sure you know that I see exactly what you're doing." My mother's voice lowered a notch. "Let's not do this. Please. Not here." "I'm not doing anything," I said. "You're the ones who keep writing me out of the script and acting like it's accidental." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was calculated, meant to remind me that I was the one making things uncomfortable. That if I didn't blend in, I was the problem. "I'll be there tomorrow," I said calmly. "Don't worry." My mother nodded once, lips pursed. "I hope you'll dress appropriately," she said. "Eliza's chosen a soft palette for the guests. Nothing too bold." I smiled. "No beige? Got it?" I left before either of them could respond. I didn't want to hear whatever carefully packaged dismissals they'd prepared. I'd heard them all before. That night, back in my suite, I took out the box. It wasn't large, just a simple navy gift box wrapped in dark ribbon. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was a wedding gift I'd spent 3 months tracking down. A maritime compass, 1940s vintage. Heavy, brass, still functional. I'd had it engraved: Eliza and Mason, 41.4800 decal N, 71.3100 decal W, begin with truth. Coordinates of the Windmere Chapel, the place our grandparents were married before my mother rebuilt the family name into a brand and the brand into a dynasty. It was a gift rooted in legacy, in shared geography. Something that could have meant something, if they'd let it. I brought it with me the next evening, hidden in my coat pocket. The rehearsal dinner was held in a glass-walled restaurant overlooking the harbor. I was escorted by a young hostess to a small round table in the far corner. It was labeled Extended Family and Friends. Next to me sat a third cousin I barely remembered and an old woman in a feathered shawl who spent 15 minutes asking if I was still a captain in the Coast Guard. At the main table, Eliza glowed. My parents held court. Mason smiled like a man recently handed a fortune. There was no seat for me there. No mention of my name in the speeches. Not even a nod in my direction. When dessert came, I walked to the front and placed the box gently in front of Eliza's plate. She opened it, blinked once, then closed the lid. "Oh," she said. "Thanks." And that was it. No questions, no pause, no attempt to read the engraving. A friend next to her squealed about the diamond bracelet on her wrist, and Eliza turned away, laughing, the box already half covered by her napkin. I stood there a second longer than I meant to, long enough to feel like furniture. Then I turned and walked out. Nobody followed. Outside, the harbor wind whipped against my collar. I reached into my coat and retrieved the compass. It was still warm. I thought about throwing it into the ocean, letting the tides take it somewhere unspoiled. But I didn't. I kept walking. The next time I gave a gift, it wouldn't be one they could ignore. It would be impossible to look away. You'd think you'd remember the happiest day of your life, but I don't remember the smiles or the anthem or the hats thrown skyward. I only remember the empty seats. It was Annapolis, late May. The air shimmered with heat, humidity, and barely contained pride. The Naval Academy's stadium swelled with family members waving flags, cheering names, clapping for sons and daughters who had survived 4 years of exhaustion, precision, and quiet transformation. Somewhere in that sea of faces, 2 blue seats had been marked, reserved. I had circled them on a copy of the stadium map and mailed it to my parents 2 weeks earlier, along with a handwritten note, addressed formally, even lovingly. To Richard and Clarice Cordell, please come. Please let me see you. I had rehearsed their arrival in my mind, what my mother might wear, the color of my father's tie. Maybe they'd bring Eliza. Maybe they'd stand and clap like the families around me did, like it mattered to them that their daughter was about to be commissioned as an officer in the United States Navy. But when the moment came, when my name was called and I stepped across the platform, chin high, shoulders squared, I looked up. The seats were empty. 2 patches of blue plastic in a stadium of human celebration. That was the moment I stopped being surprised. The call had come that morning, just as I was polishing the gold buttons on my dress whites. My father's voice had been rushed, breathless. "Alyssa, sweetheart, something's come up. I can't get into it right now, but it's a venture meeting in Zurich. Once-in-a-lifetime timing. You understand." Then my mother's voice slid in, smoother than silk. "We're so proud of you, darling. You know your father. Business waits for no one. We'll celebrate properly when you're back." They didn't ask what time the ceremony was. They didn't even ask how I was feeling. I don't remember what I said. Something polite? Something practiced. The kind of answer that makes you feel worse because you know it sounded easy to walk away from. Eliza wasn't there either. She had a tennis tournament, not a final, not a national match, just a club round. 17 years old and already better than me at choosing her audience. That afternoon, I stood with my classmates for the official photograph. Arms slung over each other's shoulders, hats tilted back, smiles bright. I smiled too. Tight. Rehearsed. But if you looked closely at the photo, really looked, you'd see it. I was the only one scanning the stands. I had spent 4 years surviving sleepless drills, brutal exams, the occasional sexist whisper. I had learned to chart a coastline blindfolded, to recite chain of command backward under pressure. I had watched friends burn out, drop out, and ship out. And somehow, it was 2 empty chairs that undid me. A week later, I received a package at my temporary quarters in Norfolk. A heavy envelope with a familiar calligraphy return address. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a card. The card read, "Congratulations. Buy something nice. A string of pearls. Maybe." I stared at it for a long time. Pearls. As if I had graduated from a finishing school. As if 4 years of naval training could be reduced to an accessory. Something shiny but silent. I folded the check once, then again, until it disappeared in the palm of my hand. And then I tore it. Not in a rage, not in some dramatic flurry. Just slow, precise, deliberate. Like removing the wrong name from a registry. Each piece fell into the trash like confetti for a parade no one came to. That was the last time I ever asked them to see me. The years that followed were a blur of deployments, sea, air, and metal corridors. My first Christmas as an officer was spent on a destroyer in the Indian Ocean. I ate vacuum-sealed turkey in a mess hall with 50 other sailors and called home from a static-choked sat phone. My mother answered. Mid-party. "Oh, darling, it's not the best time. Everyone's here. Eliza's showing off her new tennis bracelet. Isn't that lovely?" She didn't ask where I was. She didn't ask if I was safe. The call lasted under a minute. I stood alone on the steel deck that night, looking out over a sea that knew my name better than my family did. That was the year I stopped calling home altogether. But the photos kept coming. Promotions, birthdays, Eliza's college acceptance to Yale, framed and posted. Eliza's first horse. Eliza's 21st birthday at a vineyard in Napa. A brand new white convertible with a ribbon across the hood and a caption that read, "So proud of our girl." My own achievements, meanwhile, were reduced to secondhand mentions. Oh yes, Alyssa's doing, well, something in the Navy. She's always traveling. I became a detail. A vague resume bullet they deployed when it made them look worldly. Inside the family home, there were photos of Eliza in every room. Her ballet recital, her equestrian ribbons, her spring break in Barcelona. Me? 1 406 photo. tucked behind a stack of leather-bound books in the study. A group shot from graduation. I wasn't even centered in the frame. I had become a ghost with a last name they refused to pronounce in public. There was one moment, years later, that solidified everything. I was on shore leave after a brutal Atlantic operation. I made the mistake of visiting home. Over dinner, filet mignon, truffle potatoes, a 2011 Merlot. I tried to explain what had happened at sea. How we'd lost power mid-storm. How we'd rerouted the entire carrier group to avoid a collision. My father nodded once, without interest. "Sounds intense," he said. Then, "By the way, Lockheed stocks up again." Eliza groaned across the table. "Ugh. Do we have to talk about scary war stuff? It's ruining the vibe." That was the last meal I ate in their house, and as I lay in my hotel bed the night before her wedding, I thought of that dinner, of all the dinners they had without me. I realized something. They didn't fail to understand me. They succeeded in refusing to try. It was the second Tuesday in April, just 3 weeks before the wedding, when my office phone rang. Not my cell, the secure line reserved for internal command use only. That line rarely rang unless something had gone wrong on a ship, or a personnel issue needed urgent handling. I didn't recognize the number, but the prefix made my stomach tighten. It was routed through a corporate VoIP system, international. I picked up, my voice steady. "Rear Admiral Cordell." A beat of silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard in nearly a year. Too familiar, too falsely warm. "Alyssa." "Sweetheart. It's your father." I didn't respond right away. I looked at the open files on my desk. Personnel clearance reviews, sonar tech specs for the new procurement round, field reports from the Eisenhower fleet rotation. All things that mattered. All things that were real. "How did you get this number?" I asked flatly. He laughed, the sound oily, full of old money charm. "Come on. I have friends in all sorts of departments. You know that." I said nothing. He filled the silence. I wanted to check in. It's been a while. I hear you're leading the East Atlantic Expansion Group. That's incredible." He said the words like someone reading headlines from a newsletter he didn't subscribe to. I could practically hear him flipping through talking points fed to him by a younger associate. Then came the weather questions. Then a comment about Eliza's caterer. "Can you believe $22,000 for oysters?" Then a reference to a vintage car he'd just sold in Geneva. I listened, half expecting him to hang up after 3 minutes like he used to. But he didn't. He pivoted. "I heard your fleet secured the shortlist on the next-gen sonar procurement. That's big. Really big. Especially with how closely the DoD is watching those budgets." My hand stilled on the edge of a report. Now we were circling it. Anyway," he continued, now almost casual. "I just thought I should mention something. Pure coincidence. Really. You remember Vice Admiral Croft, don't you?" My eyes narrowed. The name landed like a wet stone on the desk. "Yes," I said. "I remember." He chuckled again. "Well, he and we've been in some conversations. His investment group is bidding through one of the sub-tier vendors. Cutting-edge stuff, really. Croft says it's revolutionary. Just needs a little guidance navigating the approval gauntlet." And there it was. He paused, then dropped it like it was nothing. "If someone on the inside, someone like you, could maybe flag it, or point the right direction, it'd be helpful. For the family. Of course. No need for anything formal. Just a nudge." Silence stretched long and sharp. "I hope you're not suggesting I influence a federal defense contract on behalf of your friend," I said, my tone flat. He cleared his throat. It's not influencing, it's advising. Strategically. You know how this works. There's a lot of gray area. We just need— No, I said, sharp this time. Absolutely not. His tone turned. Oh, come on. Alyssa, don't be so damn rigid. This is bigger than your codebook and your medals. I took an oath, I said. You remember that? Or were you too busy chasing stocks that day? His voice cracked then, just slightly. Enough to hear the anger beneath the polish. You're making a mistake. I hung up. An hour later, my mother called. Her opening line wasn't hello, or are you okay? It was, you've disappointed your father. I could practically hear her pacing the marble floors of the Newport estate, voice soaked in honeyed disappointment. He does so much for this family, and all he asked for was a little help. A little help committing procurement fraud? She gasped. Don't be dramatic. That man built your future. No, I said. He didn't. He walked away from it. More than once. Her voice hardened. You don't understand what it takes to keep a family together. To build a legacy. Eliza gets that. She knows what it means to support one another. The next words came soft, syrupy, poisonous. You've always been difficult. Always so. Military. That night, Eliza called. She didn't bother hiding her agenda. Mom told me everything. What is wrong with you? Nothing, I said. Except I'm not for sale. She started crying. Manufactured, hiccuping sobs. Do you even understand what you've done? Dad's been stressed for weeks. I've had to delay my honeymoon booking. Everything's more expensive now. Alyssa, do you even care? I care, I said. That you're marrying into a lie. She went quiet for a beat. Then her voice shifted. Desperate. Childish. You've always had your big career, your ships, your medals. I never asked for anything. I just want one perfect day. I closed my eyes. And you want me to trade federal law for floral centerpieces? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. That was the moment something in me settled. Like a lever had finally snapped into place. It wasn't grief. It wasn't rage. It was something colder. Something cleaner. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as leverage. As a door they couldn't open without the right badge. Fine. I'd give them a door. And when it opened, it would bring light so bright it would burn every lie they'd ever spoken. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk long after the last call ended. Long after my phone finally stopped buzzing with the echoes of people who only remembered I existed when I said no. Outside the window, the base had gone quiet. Even the harbor lights had dimmed. The only sound was the soft ticking of my grandfather's old watch, still mounted in a small case on the wall. A relic, a compass of sorts. At 200 hours. I opened a secure line. Ben Kessler answered on the first ring. Admiral, he said, voice alert even at that hour. I didn't waste time. I need everything you can pull on Vice Admiral Croft. Specifically his role in the Orion incident. Unedited reports, raw audio, personnel testimony, and anything you can find that links him financially to my father's firm. A pause. Not hesitation, just processing. Ben was the kind of officer who never asked why if he already knew the who, and he knew. He had been there, not on the Orion, but on the docks the day she limped home, hull torn, pride shattered. I'll pull what I can, might need to go through some back doors. He said, 12 hours. I trust you. You always have. We didn't say goodbye. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere beneath all the layers of grief and betrayal, there was a growing clarity. Not vengeance. Not yet. But the knowledge that something had to be done. Something bigger than confrontation. Something permanent. At 0600, I walked into my command center and requested temporary leave for personal family reasons. I didn't lie. Just didn't explain that my family had weaponized my silence for decades, and I was finally about to speak. That afternoon, I met Ben in a small, unmarked conference room at the rear of the Navy Intel Wing. He closed the door behind him, locked it, and slid a flash drive across the table. Everything you asked for, and something extra. I inserted the drive into my encrypted laptop. The files loaded slowly, one after another. Raw sonar data, mission transcripts, ship logs with redacted fields now restored. Then came the audio. Croft's voice, calm, surgical, drifted through the speakers like a ghost from a forgotten war. Push the vessel east. We need a clearer demo for the investors. Sir, that's outside the safe channel. Maintain perimeter. Acceptable risk. My stomach twisted. The Orion had nearly torn in half in that canyon. 53 souls aboard. Croft had treated it like a sales pitch. Then came my own voice. Younger. Sharper. Negative command. Overriding order. Initiating emergency rescue protocol. I hadn't heard that tape since the inquiry. Since they scrubbed the record to save his career. Since I was told I'd be thanked quietly and forgotten quickly. But Ben hadn't forgotten. He'd kept every file, every backup, every receipt. When the audio ended, he placed another document in front of me. A personnel roster from the Orion. Highlighted in red, Captain David Riker, retired. He was forced out 6 months after, Ben said. Took the fall for a decision he never made. Where is he now? Mystic, Connecticut. I already called in a favor. He's expecting you. I stared at the list, at the red ink, at the name that should have been promoted, not punished. He'll testify? I asked. Ben looked me dead in the eye. He remembers every second of that mission, and he remembers who pulled them out. I leaned forward, elbows on the table, and exhaled. They had erased me from photos. They had erased me from speeches. Now I had the one thing no amount of money or power could undo. Proof. Thank you, I said. Ben shrugged, but there was a weight in his voice when he answered. I don't do this for thanks. I do it because someone in this damn system still deserves to win the right way. He stood, paused at the door. You always said silence was your armor, he said quietly. But sometimes, Admiral, the only way to survive a storm is to make noise. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That night, I called Captain Riker. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but solid. Like the hull of an old ship that had weathered more than one storm. Commander Cordell, he said, using my rank from the mission. I'll never forget your voice that night. I need you, I told him. One more time. There was no hesitation. Send me the address, he said. I'll wear a suit. But if they start talking lies, I'll stand. I closed the laptop, stood up, and looked at my uniform. Not the one for operations, the white one, the one they hated the most. Because it wasn't just fabric and metals, it was everything they tried to erase. And tomorrow, it would be center stage. The morning of the wedding, Newport was unreasonably perfect. The kind of spring morning that photographers dream about. Light breeze, no humidity, sun slicing through clouds in carefully placed shafts, as if even the weather had RSVP'd to celebrate Eliza. I sat in my hotel room, still in my undershirt, staring at the white dress uniform folded neatly on the bed. It hadn't been touched since the last time I wore it, to present a folded flag to a widow in Virginia. I remembered her hands trembling as she took it, her little boy clutching the back of her skirt, confused and quiet. This uniform had witnessed grief, honor, silence, storms. And today, it would witness something else entirely. Truth. I got dressed without ceremony. I'd done it 1,000 times. Each movement was automatic. Precision buttons, measured folds, the gentle settling of 2 silver stars on my shoulders. But as I fastened the nameplate, Cordell, I paused. It had never felt so heavy, or so justified. The venue was already alive when I arrived. Windmere bluffs shimmered in floral opulence. Rows of white chairs arched around a marble altar flanked by glass panels overlooking the ocean. The guests were almost all seated, men in tailored suits, women in soft pastels, sunglasses and polite smiles in place. I walked through them like fog. No one stopped me, no one greeted me, most didn't recognize me, and those who did glanced away quickly, as if unsure whether they were allowed to. I didn't look for my parents. I didn't look for Eliza. I took my assigned seat without complaint. Last row, far corner, a place of exile, a place they assumed I'd blend into. Beige in spirit, even if not in cloth, but I didn't wear beige, and I didn't come to disappear. The ceremony began exactly on time. Classical strings, delicate processions, the kind of perfection you hire a team to execute. The officiant spoke warmly about love and legacy, about trust, about truth. I nearly laughed out loud. From my angle, I could see the front row. Eliza, radiant in white lace and practiced innocence. My mother beside her, stiff-backed and smiling for the crowd. My father engaged in quiet conversation with a man seated beside him, Vice Admiral Harrison Croft. There he was, the man who left 53 sailors to die in a canyon, who rewrote the record to preserve his career and now sat center aisle like a guest of honor. His medals shone as brightly as his teeth. And then came the line I'd been waiting for. The officiant's voice rose above the breeze. Before we proceed, we would like to take a moment to honor the brave men and women of our armed forces who may be with us today. The pause was respectful, measured, standard. Until Ben Kessler stood up. He wore his own white uniform, freshly pressed, ribbon straight, posture unshakable. Every head turned. Croft's eyes narrowed. Ben didn't just stand. He turned, pivoted sharply, until he faced the back of the room, until he faced me. And then, with the deliberate precision of a man who had practiced this moment to the second, he raised his hand in salute. Rear Admiral Alyssa Cordell, ma'am. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried. A ripple swept through the crowd, gasps, murmurs, hands clutched to pearls. Croft turned pale. My mother's mouth fell open. Eliza twisted in her seat, searching for me with wide, confused eyes, and I just sat there, eyes steady, hands folded in my lap. The moment froze, and then shattered. The venue's large projection screens, previously looping a silent slideshow of Eliza and Mason's engagement photos, blinked to black. Then came the sonar map, blue and green tones, depth readings, sector markers, then audio. The potential loss of life is an acceptable risk. Croft's voice. The ballroom went still. Then my voice. Younger. Clipped. Negative command. Initiating rescue protocol. We're going in. Footage followed. Deep sea ROV images of the damaged hull. Divers in black suits moving with urgency. Real-time chaos. Not the kind you stage. Croft shot to his feet. "This is slander!" he barked. "This data is falsified. Turn it off!" My father rose beside him. "There's been a mistake," he said, flailing. "This is some sort of prank." But no one moved. No one turned the feed off. And then, slowly, another man stood. Older. Gray hair. Tweed jacket. Civilian clothes. But his presence filled the space like ballast in a storm. "I'm Captain David Riker," he announced, voice steady. "Former commanding officer of the USS Orion." Every neck craned. He pointed toward the screen. "That recording is real. That data is real. And that man," he said, turning to Croft, "left us for dead to secure a business deal." He pointed again, but this time, at me. "And that woman, then Commander Cordell, broke protocol to save every last one of us." The silence broke. Some people clapped. Others stood. Cameras were already out. Phones filming. Capturing everything. Croft's face had drained of color. He turned as if to leave, but found Ben and 2 other uniformed officers already flanking the aisle. They didn't move. They didn't touch him. They didn't need to. He was trapped. By truth. Eliza stood in her gown, veil trembling, mouth open. My mother rushed toward me. "You've ruined it," she hissed. "You've ruined everything." I stood. "No," I said, voice even. "You did that the moment you decided lies were easier to love than your daughter." Behind me, a woman called out. "Who is she?" Ben answered without turning. "She's the officer who saved the Orion." And that was the moment the wedding ended. Not with vows, but with facts, with names, with salutes, with truth that didn't need blessing to be holy. They pulled us into a side room not long after the screen went dark. A security guard had tried to usher me out discreetly, gentle hand on the elbow, murmured apologies, but Ben intercepted him with a look so sharp it cut through protocol. Instead, we were led to a private drawing room just off the main hall. High ceilings, velvet curtains, a fireplace that hadn't been lit in decades. Ornate, expensive, designed for scandal containment. They closed the door behind us. Inside were the ghosts. My mother, cheeks flushed not from shame but fury. Eliza, mascara streaked, veil pushed back, her posture unsteady like a statue on the verge of collapse. My father, slumped into an armchair as if the structure of his entire world had been yanked out from beneath him. Croft stood near the window, not pacing, too proud for that. Just breathing heavily, like a man trying to remember which version of himself he had walked in wearing. I didn't sit. No one offered me a chair. My mother broke first. "What in God's name did you think you were doing?" Her voice was sharp, trembling. "You could have destroyed everything." I looked at her, calm. "No," I said. "You destroyed everything the moment you decided your image was worth more than integrity." My father sat forward, his voice low and hollow. "You'll pay for this, Alyssa. You think there won't be consequences? You embarrassed a flag officer. At a wedding?" "No," I corrected. "I exposed a criminal. And I did it in the most civil venue possible, among the people who needed to see it." Croft turned to me then. His voice, when it came, was laced with disdain. "This is career suicide. You think Command's going to celebrate you for this?" I smiled. "I'm not looking for celebration. I'm looking for accountability. And judging by the audio files now circulating among half the guests, I'd say we're past the point of denial. Eliza finally found her voice. You didn't just ruin the wedding, she snapped. You ruined my life. Huh. She stepped toward me, her dress dragging like a tide coming loose. This was supposed to be my day, not your parade. I met her eyes, saw the rage there, the collapse of a lifelong script she'd memorized. This was never about you, I said gently. It was about what you tried to build your life on, and what I refused to stay silent about. You could have handled it quietly, she shrieked. A letter, a conversation, anything but this. You've had 30 years of quiet, I said. I'm done with that. My mother's hands clenched into fists. You think you're righteous? You humiliated your family in front of everyone, people we've known for decades. You humiliated yourselves, I said, my voice steady. All I did was hold up a mirror. Then the knock came. 3 sharp taps. The door opened. 2 figures stepped in. Plainclothes investigators, badges clipped to their belts. Behind them, 2 uniformed Newport police officers. Everyone froze. The taller of the 2 agents looked directly at Croft. Vice Admiral Harrison Croft, he said clearly. You are under arrest for obstruction of justice and falsification of federal military records in connection to the Orion incident. Croft's mouth opened, then closed again. The agent stepped forward and turned him gently but firmly. As the cuffs clicked shut, the sound echoed across the polished floor like a gavel. My father didn't speak. He just watched, his expression blank. But I could see his fingers twitching on the armrest, counting losses, calculating damage. Eliza collapsed into a chair, shaking her head. This isn't real, she whispered. It can't be real. As the agents led Croft toward the door, he stopped and turned his head. This isn't over, he said to me. It is for you, I said simply. The door shut behind them, and then silence. No one moved. No one knew what came next. Until I did. I turned to go. My mother called after me. Alyssa, where are you going? I didn't stop. I'm going where I belong, I said. And it's not here. Her voice broke. We're family. No, I said, pausing at the threshold. We shared blood. That's not the same thing. Then Eliza stood, trembling. Please, she said. Just say it was a mistake. Just undo it. You've ruined my wedding, my reputation. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't a villain. She was a product of entitlement, of reward without cost, of a system that made me invisible to keep her centered. You want a marriage built on fraud? I asked. Or do you want to know what truth feels like? She didn't answer, but her fingers, still gripping the edge of the table, slowly uncurled. I walked to the door and placed my hand on the handle. Behind me, my father's voice came, dry and lifeless. She's not your sister anymore. And for once, I agreed. I opened the door. The hallway outside was buzzing with whispers, camera flashes, the murmurs of society unraveling. And for the first time, I didn't feel exposed. I felt clean. I didn't go back to the reception. I didn't need to. Let them finish the charade without me. Let them pose for the salvaged photos, toast with champagne that now tasted like rust. Let them explain to the guests why the bride's sister was escorted out not by security, but by a storm of consequence dressed in white. I walked straight out of the Windmere Bluffs estate, past the gravel lot lined with European sedans and white-gloved valets, down the narrow path that led to the water. The air hit different there, sharper, salted with something ancient. The same ocean that had once swallowed the Orion now curled gently at the rocks beneath the pier, as if it too had softened with time. It didn't judge me. It never had. The ocean had always understood one thing my family never did: that what's hidden below the surface has more weight than anything above it. I stood at the edge of the dock and let the wind thread through the loose ends of my braid. For the first time in years, I didn't feel armored. I felt still, not victorious, not vindicated, just still. The compass was in my pocket, the one I had given Eliza, the one she'd left sitting under a napkin, forgotten like a gift bag at a baby shower. I had retrieved it after the dinner, quietly, when no one was looking. Now. I pulled it out and stared at the engraving. Eliza and Mason, 41-4800 Aquani N, 71-3100 Grad W. Begin with truth. I turned the brass gently in my palm. The truth was, it had never been for her. It had been for me. A reminder that even the most finely drawn maps are meaningless if you forget your starting point. I considered throwing it into the ocean, letting it sink where no hands could discard it again. But instead, I placed it in my coat pocket and buttoned the flap. Not because I needed to keep it, but because I finally understood what it was. It wasn't a symbol of rejection. It was the final piece of weight I was ready to set down. Behind me, I heard slow footsteps on the wood. Not rushed, not timid. I turned. A woman was approaching, maybe early 30s. Her coat cinched tight against the wind, one hand gripping the edge of a stroller. Her hair was windblown, her expression unsure. She stopped a few feet away, hesitating. "Excuse me," she said. I hope this isn't strange. Are you Admiral Cordell?" The rank landed softer than usual. No salute, no rigidity, just recognition. I nodded. She glanced down into the stroller. "My husband. He served under you. On the Orion. He doesn't talk about it much, but when he does, he always says the same thing." She looked up again, eyes glassed with something that wasn't quite tears. "He says he's alive because of you." I swallowed once. My throat had gone dry. The child in the stroller looked up, maybe 5 years old. Small fingers curled around a crayon drawing. She reached out, holding it toward me without a word. A lopsided ship, blue scribbles for waves, a stick figure in white with yellow stars on her shoulders, and in messy purple crayon, written across the top, "Thank you, Admiral." I took the paper with both hands. My vision blurred for the first time that day. I crouched down slowly, looking the little girl in the eye. "Did you draw this?" She nodded, proud but shy. I smiled, not the one I gave reporters or defense briefings, but the one I hadn't used since I was 12 and still believed people like my mother could change. "It's perfect," I said. She beamed. The woman placed a hand on the stroller's handle, voice soft. "We heard about what happened today. I wanted to say it, before the noise takes over." "Thank you," I said. "But what I meant was, you're the first one who ever did." They left soon after, quietly, the child waving over her shoulder. The wind picked up again as they disappeared back toward the road. I stood there, holding the crayon drawing in one hand and the compass in the other, and suddenly I realized I had spent years chasing recognition from the wrong audience, begging for love from people who only knew how to give conditions. But this was what legacy looked like. Not portraits in a mansion, not monograms on napkins, but a child who'd never seen war, still knowing my name. A woman willing to cross a pier just to say thank you. A stick figure in crayon wearing my stars. The wedding was over, but my life wasn't. In fact, it was just beginning. back at the hotel. I laid the drawing flat on the desk beside my medals, not because it belonged there by rank, but because it outranked them all. Then I unpinned my silver stars, not in defeat, but as a quiet ritual, a letting go. The world would remember what it wanted to, but finally, I would choose what to carry forward. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hotel room was still, but my thoughts weren't. They pressed against the walls, paced between shadows, whispering every version of what could have been, every conversation we never had, every silence that lasted longer than it should have. I turned on the desk lamp. Soft amber light spilled across the notepad beside the phone. Hotel stationery. Thick. Impersonal. But it would do. I picked up the pen and wrote their names at the top of the page. Mother. Father. Eliza. It felt strange, writing to people I hadn't spoken to, not truly spoken to, in years. But something inside me needed to speak. Not to demand. Not to accuse. Just to release. I began with the facts. I wrote about Annapolis, about the 2 empty seats in the stadium that had never been filled. I wrote about the call from Zurich, about the check in the envelope, and the string of pearls I never bought. I wrote about the silence on Christmas Eve, how your laughter came through the satellite line clearer than your voices. I wrote about the compass, the one I gave you, Eliza, the one you left sitting beneath a napkin like a discarded favor. I told you what it meant, what I engraved, why I chose it, what it was meant to remind us both of, that even a perfect ceremony has no meaning if it's built on erasure. I wrote about the Orion, about the pressure in the hull, the moment we nearly died, the voice that overrode command because protocol was going to get us killed, the lives we saved, the ones we almost didn't. I wrote about what it cost me, and then I wrote what I never thought I'd say. I don't hate you. I don't even blame you anymore, because blame is heavy, and I've carried enough. The pen moved on its own now, not with rage, not with sorrow, with clarity. I wanted so badly to be seen by you. I confused visibility with love, respect with approval, and I chased it for decades. But I was never going to win a game whose rules were written to keep me outside the frame. And the truth is, I was never invisible. I was just inconvenient. So I'm stepping out of the picture you kept editing. I wrote about Ben, about the model destroyer he gave me on the 10th anniversary of my first command, about how he remembered things I forgot, how he never asked for an explanation, only ever offered space to breathe. A fortress built not of walls, but of presence. I wrote about Captain Riker, about the look in his eyes when he stood up in front of that crowd, the kind of gaze you earn, not demand. And I wrote about the little girl on the pier. She didn't know my history. She didn't ask about my record. She just handed me a drawing and said thank you. And that's what recognition should feel like. Real, unrequested, undeserved. That's what love looks like when it's not being rationed. The last paragraph took the longest, because it wasn't for them. It was for me. I forgive you. Not because you asked, not because you deserve it, but because I no longer want to be tied to your damage. This is not a door I'm slamming. It's one I'm choosing to walk past. I hope one day you see the difference. When I finished, I sat back and stared at the pages. 4 sheets, front and back, covered in careful handwriting. I read it once, then again, and then, quietly, I tore it in half, and again, until the words no longer held form, just paper and ink, scattered like the things I used to carry in my chest. I dropped the pieces into the hotel wastebasket. I didn't feel regret, only relief. Because I realized I had never written that letter for them. I had written it for the girl in the photo from Annapolis, the one smiling too tightly, standing next to classmates whose parents brought flowers and flags, the girl who kept checking the bleachers even after the anthem ended, who waited just a little too long to give up. She needed to hear it, that her pain was real, that her silence wasn't weakness, that one day she'd become the woman who stood while others folded. I turned off the lamp. The room fell into gentle dark again, and somewhere beneath the quiet hum of the HVAC, I thought I heard something else. Not applause, not voices, just a kind of stillness that felt earned, like breath held, and finally released. It wasn't broadcasted. There were no reporters, no floral arches, no orchestras playing Vivaldi in the background. But it was the first ceremony I ever truly belonged to. It took place 3 months after the wedding. A quiet spring morning at the U.S. Naval Academy's Memorial Hall, marble columns, a vaulted ceiling that swallowed every footstep, and on the far wall, a new bronze plaque, small, simple, heavy with truth. Etched into it were the names of those who had served with uncommon valor during the Orion incident. My name was there, for the first time. It was official. No redactions, no buried transcripts, no silent shame, just recognition. I stood before it in full dress uniform, the same white I wore the day everything cracked open. Beside me was Captain Ben Kessler, promoted recently, not because of politics, but because integrity still had a pulse somewhere in the system. Captain Riker had flown in from Connecticut. He wore a navy blue suit with a faint stain on the cuff and a proud tilt in his chin. His wife stood beside him, clutching his hand. Around us, a dozen more sailors, some who had been aboard the Orion, some who had only heard the stories but knew what it meant to stand in silence for what's right. No speeches were given, just a reading of the names. Then, a moment of silence, and in that silence, I felt it. Not grief, not triumph, just peace. No cameras, no curated narrative, no one trying to sell the story. It wasn't polished, but it was real. After the reading, Riker stepped forward, rested a hand on the plaque, and turned to me. "You didn't just save lives," he said. "You saved truth." I nodded. That was enough. As the group began to disperse, I stayed behind for a few moments. I traced the engraved letters of my name with the tips of my fingers. The metal was cold, solid, permanent. History had finally written it down right. And this time, no one could erase me. Spring came slower that year, maybe because I wasn't rushing to meet it. For the first time in decades, I wasn't counting days between deployments or waiting for the next storm to hit. I still woke at 0500 out of habit, but I let myself pause by the window longer. The harbor view from my quarters at Naval Station Norfolk looked the same as it always had. Ships coming in, ships going out, cranes stretching toward the clouds. But I was seeing it differently now. I had stayed, survived, been seen. That changes you. The Navy offered me a new command in early May. A carrier group under my leadership, stationed aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford. It was a post people angled for, fought for. I hadn't asked for it. But when the offer came, I said yes. Because I was ready. Not to prove anything, but to serve with full clarity about who I was and who I answered to. On the morning of deployment, I stood on the command bridge, watching the ship cut through calm waters. The metal beneath my boots thrummed like a living thing. I had stood on many ships in my life, but this one, This one felt like mine. Ben stood beside me, freshly shaven, uniform pressed to perfection. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, arms behind his back, eyes on the horizon. Then he said, almost casually, "Clear skies ahead, Admiral." I smiled, not the rehearsed kind, a real one that reached my eyes. "Let's try not to wreck that record," I said. He laughed softly. For a while, we didn't speak. The ship moved beneath us like time itself. The sea stretched in every direction. No edges, no borders. And then I said something I hadn't planned to say out loud. I think I stopped needing them. Ben didn't ask who I meant. He never needed to. Instead, he simply nodded. "You built something they never could. Something real. That's how you know it's yours." He was right. Because the further I got from Newport, the less that house by the cliffs felt like home. Home had never been mahogany paneling or crystal chandeliers or curated family photos. Home was steel and seawater. It was a bridge lit by quiet discipline. It was voices on comms trusting me with their lives. It was a little girl handing me a crayon drawing that outweighed every trophy Eliza ever held. A few weeks into the deployment, I had my quarters arranged a little differently. One shelf above my desk now held only two things: the antique compass I had once gifted and reclaimed, and the drawing from the little girl at the pier, now laminated and framed in clear acrylic. Every time I looked at them, I remembered. Legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you live. And mine. Mine wasn't tied to a last name. It wasn't built on reputation or weddings or stock portfolios. It was written in the wake of a ship, in the decisions no one clapped for, in the nights spent standing alone while others danced beneath chandeliers. And that legacy would live far beyond my last salute. It would be passed down in the quiet courage of those who chose integrity over convenience. It would echo in every officer I trained, every sailor who learned that dignity isn't granted, it's earned. Sometimes. I still received emails about the wedding, reporters looking for quotes, guests wondering if what they'd seen had really happened. Croft's trial date had been set. My father had stepped down from his board positions. Eliza's engagement had dissolved quietly. The photos scrubbed from every corner of the internet except the ones no one could fully erase. I answered none of them, because I had said everything that needed to be said. Once, and with clarity. The rest of my life would be action, not explanation. And if anyone asked what happened, I would tell them this: I showed up wearing truth, and I left with peace. Everything else is noise. It happened 2 years later, on a winter morning quiet enough to hear the sea thinking. I had just returned from deployment and was scheduled to speak at the Naval Academy, an annual tradition where high-ranking officers were invited to address new graduates. I hadn't planned to accept the invitation, but something in me said yes this time. Maybe because I knew what I would say. Maybe because I finally knew who I was speaking for. The auditorium was packed. Rows of white uniforms, eyes forward, some nervous, some too proud to admit it. Behind them sat parents, siblings, mentors, people who saw only the polished version, not the long nights, the near misses, the quiet cost. I stood at the podium, hands steady. I didn't talk about medals. I didn't mention deployments. I told them about the Orion, about the moment leadership meant defying silence, about the difference between command and compliance. I told them that their legacy wouldn't be written in brass or marble, but in choices made when no one was watching. Afterward, a young woman approached me near the back hall. She was barely 22. Her posture was perfect, but her eyes were soft, unsure. She looked at me the way I once looked at commanders, half awe, half question. "Ma'am," she said, "how do you know when it's enough? When you've done enough?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked, "Are you asking how to be seen or how to live with yourself?" She blinked, surprised, then nodded. "Both," she admitted. So I said the thing I wished someone had told me at her age. You don't chase being seen. You live so clearly. They have no choice but to remember. She stood taller after that. Later that evening, as I walked back toward the officer's exit, I heard someone call out, "Admiral Cordell." I turned. It was Eliza. I hadn't seen her since that day at Windmere Bluffs. Her hair was shorter now, simpler. No makeup, just a blue scarf against the cold and something fragile in her eyes. We stood a few feet apart. Neither of us moved. Then, slowly, she reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She handed it to me. Inside was a photograph, faded, curled at the edges. It was from Annapolis. My graduation. I was standing alone, hand raised in salute, the bleachers behind me empty. "I found this cleaning out Mom's attic," she said. "It's the only copy." I looked at it for a long time. Then I nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you hate me?" I looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, I didn't see the girl who had taken my place at every family dinner, or the woman who called silence peace. I saw someone trying. "No," I said. "But I stopped waiting for you to love me the way I loved you." She swallowed. "I think I'm finally learning how." I didn't answer. She turned and walked away. And I let her. That was the last time we spoke. The photo now rests beside the crayon drawing on my shelf. Two versions of who I've been. Two reminders of why I still stand. And every once in a while, when I visit the academy or walk past Memorial Hall, a young cadet will pause, straighten up, and salute. Not because of my stars, but because of my story. Because the truth will always rise, even when it's buried beneath weddings, titles, and silence. Even when it walks in alone, especially then. So if you ever find yourself erased from the picture, walk in anyway. Let them see who you are. And if no one salutes, stand still. Eventually, someone will. And when they do, you'll know. This time, it mattered.